Welcome back now. A look at some news further afield. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Russian President Vladimir Putin and Maria, who serves as Russia's Children's Rights Commissioner. The ICC says the pair are responsible for the war crime of unlawful deportation and transfer of children. Putin's administration is being accused of forcing children into Russian camps for political redaction. Let's unpack this further with New York correspondent William Denselow. William, thanks for your time this evening. I think many are quite shocked at this, but maybe just unpack this warrant of arrest for Vladimir Putin as well as a second individual accused of war crimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, many were expecting some kind of charges to senior Russian officials, but few were expecting they would be quite this senior. Of course, the announcement of this arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin is incredibly significant, considering this the scope and the fact that the International Criminal Court is getting this directly involved and is essentially stating that Vladimir Putin is deliberately, there is enough evidence to conceivably go forward with these kind of accusations in the hope that Russia's president would eventually stand trial. Of course, significant that these charges really focus on the alleged deportation and forced transfer of children from Ukraine to Russian-controlled territories or Russia. Of course, Ukraine itself estimates that more than 16,000 children have been transferred illegally in the past year or so. And of course, significantly, as you rightly mentioned, the other person also issued with an arrest warrant is Maria Lvova-Belova, who is the Commissioner for Russia's Children's Rights. Of course, there has been a fierce rebuttal from Russian officials, as you expect, with the former leader of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, describing the arrest warrant to akin to toilet paper.
Yeah, it's rather shocking. William, what are the chances, though, that we would ever see Russian President Vladimir Putin in a courtroom, or the chances of him actually being arrested?
Well, it's somewhat unlikely, considering the fact that, first of all, Russia does not adhere to and is not a signatory to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. That was laid out by Maria Zakharova, who is a spokesperson for Russia's foreign ministry, essentially saying that this kind of decision is null and void. And we've also know that the ICC doesn't have the power to make arrests, and it does not try people in absentia. So unless Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, were to be in another nation or to be extradited himself, which of course is incredibly unlikely, that we will not be expecting to see him face these charges directly any time soon.
Rather interesting. William, do we know the whereabouts of Putin at this stage? There were some reports about a week ago that he is unwell. Do we know anything about where he is? And if this warrant of arrest is executed, how would that likely play out? I know you're saying it's highly unlikely that he would be in a courtroom, but, you know, if there's a warrant of arrest out, is that likely to happen?
Well, to that second point that you make, we saw some glimpses of how the United Nations might respond to that. Reporters asking a spokesperson for the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, for example, whether the Secretary General would meet with Vladimir Putin should this situation arise in the future. The UN essentially stating that the Secretariat does not get involved with matters of the ICC and that the two are independent. Stefan Dujarric, the spokesperson for the Secretary General, essentially stating that the Secretary General would not rule out meeting with any particular individual if it helped promote establishing peace and security in any environment, but he stressed that he didn't want to get into strict hypotheticals or anything to that nature. And when it comes to the status of Russia's president, well, all focus from the Kremlin has very much been direct rebuttals to this report. We've had a number of very strong responses. Of course, Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, has described this ICC announcement as outrageous and unacceptable. Dmitry Medvedev, of course, the former leader, describing it to toilet paper. And Maria Zakharova says it has no significance whatsoever because Russia is not a signatory to the ICC's Rome Statute, essentially means that they can make as many warrants or threats as they like, but because Russia is not a pen holder to this, it doesn't hold any water in Russia.
So what happens when it comes to Putin's movements, though, William? Because as much as you say, as a country, Russia doesn't hold any water to this, what happens to Putin's movements? I mean, does he just stay in Russia? What actually happens?
That's a fascinating question going forward, because essentially there are more than 100 nations that have signed up to the Rome Statute, so there would conceivably be ramifications going forward. So there'd be real questions that will need to be answered. For example, should Russia's president seek to come here to New York to address the United Nations General Assembly either this September or in any September to come, the next time the UNGA comes around? Of course, most world leaders tend to come to these kind of events if there are G20 events or other significant political events in the future that are held in countries that are signed up to the Rome Statute. Real question marks over what would that mean for President Putin and his ability to travel to these events. Of course, there are a number of nations that are more closely allied to Russia that might not seek to execute such kind of extraditions. But of course, the significance of this is that any time that Vladimir Putin, should he seek to go to another country, that third country that is welcoming the president, hypothetically, would have very strong questions to answer from the international community that could ask, conceivably, why are you allowing someone who is wanted by the ICC into your country?
I know this question might be, or the answer to this question might be rather obvious, William, but is there any possibility that he could be arrested in Russia?
Not as things stand. Russia does not hold any credibility to what we're hearing from the ICC. They're not a signatory to the Rome Statute, and of course with Vladimir Putin as Russia's president, there is absolutely no reason why they would decide to sign up to this statute going forward. The ICC doesn't have any powers to bring in their own officials to conduct an arrest like this. So at the moment, it is clearly symbolic, but it is a hugely defiant gesture from the ICC, and significant in itself that they have enough evidence, they believe, to go forward, and would believe that they have enough to try Russia's president at the moment. And of course, we've heard from Ukrainian officials as well. They have come out, and we've heard from several senior officials in Kiev that say that this is a significant moment for them. They also say that it's just the beginning in their quest to see Russian officials held accountable for what's transpired in Ukraine over the past year.
Have we seen a Ukrainian president respond to this? I know you've just mentioned officials saying that this is just the beginning, but have we actually seen the president coming out and responding to this? Because these are serious allegations.
I think it's very likely that we will hear from Volodymyr Zelensky. He typically addresses the Ukrainian people each evening, but so far it has been some of his senior advisors that have done the talking. We've heard from Mikhailo Podolak, who is a senior advisor to Ukraine's president. He said that this is a turning point in Russia's position, current global position on the world stage. They say that this is a potential turning point when it comes to how Russia is perceived in the eyes of the international community. The president or chief of staff, Andrei Yermak, says that this is just the beginning, and the prosecutor general in Ukraine says this is a historic decision. Of course, the significance of this as well comes just a day after a UN report came out that very much agreed with what we heard from the ICC, saying that they had found evidence of what they described as illegal transfers of hundreds of Ukrainian children to Russia, and the UN has previously said in its reports that they believe there are instances that crimes against humanity have been committed by Russian forces.
It's going to be very interesting to see how all of this unfolds, especially Russian President Vladimir Putin's next moves. Thank you so much for that update. That's our New York correspondent, William Denselow.